Welcome back to my podcast where we explore the intersections of family law, personal growth, and the systems that shape our lives. I'm Christopher Meyer. I'm a Sugar Land family law attorney, and today we are diving into a topic that is close to my heart and critical for our communities: the importance of childhood intervention. As someone who grew up in CPS, I know firsthand how early action can steer a child's life onto a better path or leave them struggling if it is absent. My guest today is Judge Jamie Rawlinson, who presides over the Coastal Bend Children's Court in Houston, serving Fort Bend, Galveston, and Wharton counties. Since 2018, she's been a tireless advocate for kids in the child welfare system, overseeing the cases that decide their futures. Before taking the bench, she spent years as an assistant county attorney representing CPS, bringing a wealth of experience to her role. Judge Rawlinson, welcome to the podcast. But before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe also introduce Ms. Bischoff?
Sure. So as you stated, my name is Jamie Rawlinson. I am the associate judge for the Coastal Bend Children's Court. For the last almost 7 years, I've been presiding over the child welfare cases in Fort Bend, Galveston, and Wharton counties here in Southeast Texas. It wasn't a job I initially saw myself doing out of law school, but it found me and I've never left. I'm married. I have 4 children. I'm not really sure how much, what else to really say about myself other than I am also passionate about my work and trying to make the child welfare system really work for children and for families. Ms. Bischoff is the early intervention court liaison for our court in Galveston County, though she dips her toes pretty much in most of the counties in Southeast Texas at this point. And the way that role came to the court was through a pilot program through partners in it's PEI, right, Barbara?
Yes.
And what exactly? PEI is a prevention arm of Health and Human Services, which is the same global state agency that also houses the Department of Family and Protective Services. So essentially, 2-3 years ago, I think they got grant money for prevention, and this was the program with which that they came up with. They piloted it in 3 counties in Texas based on performance measures, number of referrals, identified services in the communities. And I really pushed for Galveston County to be able to get this pilot program because I knew just from my experience, even though it wasn't necessarily reflected on paper, that there was a huge lack of resources in the community for our families in Galveston Island. And the Children's Commission, the Office of Court Administration, and PEI answered my prayers and gave us the program. And then after that, we hired Barbara. Barbara is our early intervention liaison.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I do have a few questions, and we can bring in Barbara if maybe want to have her help us out with a question. But Judge, you've spent years working with kids in crisis. First as an attorney, now as a judge. What does childhood intervention mean to you, and why do you think it's pivotal in the lives of these children?
Well, so one of the reasons why I think it's so important is because, and the way that we're looking at early childhood intervention here is to hopefully intervene in a family before CPS has to get involved and the court system. That's really the goal. And sort of like yourself, but not exactly. I did not grow up in CPS care, but I was raised by a single parent. We didn't have a lot of money. My mom is a great mom. She did the best that she could for me and my siblings, but she had a really strong family support. She's very active in her church. She had a strong community support behind her and a lot of friends who helped her. If she wouldn't have had those resources, it would have been a lot harder for her. And not all of our families, a lot of our families find themselves in similar positions, right? Like that's not an uncommon thing in our society. Single moms who are struggling to make ends meet, struggling to work and provide childcare at the same time. a lot of slippery slopes that can lead to unnecessarily into CPS intervention. And what we see in a lot of our cases is so many of these cases are generational. So oftentimes, even if the parent of the child who's currently in our system was not necessarily in CPS care themselves, or him or herself rather, there was some type of poverty, generational poverty, or neglect or abuse that happened in their life as an adult as well. So all of that to say, all of those things that were in place that helped my mom, I want to put those in place to help families as well, to be able to avoid that situation, so that if you're lacking a coping skill and you just don't know what to do, there are community resources available. When you go to use the community health network in your county, for example, that provider can then say, okay, here's some free counseling services. Don't use marijuana. Let's find a counselor. Here are some free food services. Don't not feed your kids. Let's figure something out for that. Here are some domestic violence services, et cetera, et cetera. Because if we can solve the problem when it's small, it's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier just to solve a food problem or a food and depression problem. It's a lot harder to solve a long-term substance abuse problem that's coupled with severe neglect and domestic violence. So that's really the goal. I don't know if that was a really long answer to your question.
No, it's a perfect answer. Thank you. Okay, from your vantage point on the bench, what are some of the most common signs you see that a child needs intervention, and what happens when those signs are missed?
Well, I mean, look, children don't have the same inhibitions that adults have sometimes, right? So they'll tell you they need help. They're not ashamed to tell you that. But so often in our child welfare cases, we see children with, I'm going to use air quotes, behavioral issues.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I see them, but that's what they're labeled as. That's a clear sign that something's probably missing, right? It's not to say that there aren't homes where there's nothing missing and that children have some type of developmental delay or some other type of issue that needs assistance. It's not if this then that necessarily. But in non-removal cases, such as whenever the court orders services that are supposed that somebody was, it's the little things where the child has not necessarily been directly impacted yet. But as a person who's been working in this field since 2011, you can see the impact coming if we don't do something now. So let me give you an example. When you have a parent who picks up some type of minor charge that has to do with substances, children weren't there necessarily. They might not even know that it's happening. But what you have is a person who was potentially like a functioning addict, and the wheels are starting to fall off the bus. And slowly what you will see happen if that person does not receive some type of early intervention is the whole bus is just going to break down because they're no longer functioning, right? Something's taking place. So those are really kind of the signs. And then sometimes, people aren't in front of the court, so we don't see the signs until it gets to be a removal case. But I can guarantee you, in almost every single case that is a removal case, there were factors that were the same across all of the cases. Minor criminal infractions, what is considered to be recreational drug use, just kind of poor choices where nobody really got hurt, but they're like poor parenting choices or poor life choices. So all of those things are probably going to be relatively consistent. Does that make sense?
No, perfect sense. Okay. I have seen how trauma can linger, from my own childhood in CPS. What does the research or your experience tell us about how early trauma shapes a child's brain, behavior, or future?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor. Barbara probably has a lot more knowledge about this than I do necessarily because just of her background as um, in education. So I'll give you kind of what I see, and then I'll let Barbara piggyback
Of
off
course.
the back of me that will provide hopefully a better in-depth response. But generally speaking, we know science will tell us, research will tell us that the from the before a baby is even born, the amount of connections that are happening in their brain and the ways in which just human beings ourselves have evolved so that these connections set us up for future successes in life, right? So if you just talking to your baby every single day, the number of connections that that baby's brain is making from, I can't think of, again, I'm not a doctor and I've gone to these lectures a lot, but I cannot think of the name of these receptors that are in the brain. Anyway,
Mhm.
so just I'm going to call them
I think
receptors. I'm going to
synaptic endings,
it's one that starts with a
neurotransmitters,
D. I'm like
dendrites.
completely offending the
No, that's fine.
neuroscience
Oh,
community
it's
right now.
okay.
Anyway, so they're like, stay in your lane, Judge. You don't know anything about
No,
brain.
it's fine.
Okay. But anyway, these connections are vitally important. Those are how we develop our executive functioning skills for later in life. And it's not just necessarily in child abuse cases. You see these lack of connections in kids who are just like stuck on their tablets and missing
Hmm.
real human interactions in their lives. So without those, when you just look, like you can just Google it and look at the pictures of the brains between kids who are growing up in a healthy environment and kids who are not. And when they are losing all of those connections, we're setting them up for reading problems, social interaction problems. Uh, when substance abuse or crime is sort of minimized or normalized in their lives, we know just through science and statistics that experimentation with drugs or illegal substances or alcohol prior to the age of 21 and substantially increases the likelihood of that person becoming an addict. And so that's kind of my umbrella. I'm sure Barbara can tell you more specifically exactly how these issues can also present themselves in school age children because that's who she worked with prior to being a child advocate and being in this position. So Barbara, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
I'm just we tend to label children as troubled or behavior and not really get to know what's happening behind the scenes. And coming from a self-contained classroom, many of our kids came in who had never read a book, never had a book read to them, hungry. They only eat at school. And all of this would affect their behavior, which would then get them this label that, again, I agree with Judge Rawlinson. They are not all behavior children. There were things behind the scenes that needed to be taken care of so that they could learn. And a lot of times I would see we want them to come in and sit still and do and just concentrate on their work. But if you're knowing you're going to go home to no food or no water or a parent who cannot take care of you because of their substance, you can't concentrate on sitting still in a desk. And that again, you get that label. And then what I truly believe once you put that label on them, they're if you say, "Hey, you're troubled," they're going to try and be the best troubled kid they can be because that gives them that sense of, "Hey, I'm doing something good." But if you take that next step and find out what is going on, then you can realize that, okay, well, we need to get some food for this family, and I don't want to put this on the schools. The schools are doing the best they can, in my opinion, with what they have. So it's parents, our parents, like Judge said, it's a circle. It's a circle. If the parents didn't get it, they don't know how to give it to their kid. So we need to have resources out there to help the whole family.
Okay, thank you. If for the listeners, if anyone's interested in learning more about the shape of a child's brain and its behavior, how that could affect behavior, I do have other podcasts discussing neural pathways and neuroplasticity. But next to my next question, you oversee cases across 3 counties. What are some of the biggest challenges in the Texas child welfare system today that make timely intervention harder to achieve?
Ooh, how much this, you said this is only an hour.
And well,
Okay,
give me the
so
short,
I'm
the Cliff notes.
gonna refer to your notes for just a second to just kind of break down the question a little bit. Okay, well, so I see 3 counties and they're different. They're all very different counties. So that's one. Texas is a huge state, and as being part of a large state, it's going to be difficult to manage what is good for one county versus another, right? In that area. I mean, just Houston itself is like the size of Rhode Island. So when you, and then the population is diverse. It's urban versus rural. You know, so one is in Texas, I think just as a just general challenge based on population, demographics, and size, it's difficult to come up with a model that benefits or works for everybody. Because I mean, we just know that Houston is very different than El Paso, right? But more than that is the buy-in for early intervention. That would be one of them. That would be a huge barrier that I see right now, is getting people to buy into the idea that if we help to support families on the front ends, families will really take care of themselves and they don't really need us to do it for them. And because I genuinely do not think that people want to rely on us for things or want us to be part of their lives. I think sometimes they leave our court and they're grateful that we were, but ultimately, who wants CPS to be part of your life? So if we were to provide on the front end things that families need and resources for them, they'll use them. We see it. I mean, when this program initially started in Galveston and there was more buy-in, we saw the numbers change. We saw the removals go down. We saw the referrals go down. We held resource fairs where community partners talked to each other and told us success stories of them working amongst each other to help families before they got involved with us. So I think that the buy-in is a really important, getting people to just understand that you're not going to necessarily, it's child welfare is a really difficult field because it's not an exact science. So, and anything takes time to prove that it works, but that over time, shoring up community resources and nonprofits and our partners who are working to do prevention work, I think over the long term will keep children out of foster care, will keep children out of juvenile detention, honestly, and have other unintended consequences that turn out to be very beneficial for our communities and our society and our state. Overall, funding is always a problem, right? I mean, in any field, somebody's going to tell you that. Well, what we could do with more money would be amazing, but that's definitely true where children are concerned. I mean, they can't do a lot of things for themselves. They are completely dependent on adults for survival and for success. So whenever we whittle down the agencies through funding and personnel that are there to support them, we can't really expect them to thrive. So, it just that equation just doesn't work. Um, so those are the two primary challenges that I see, and then also perception. I think perception is a huge problem. People perceive that if you are poor, or if you need help, or if you are struggling in some way, that you did something wrong, or you made bad choices, or that you are a bad person, or that you're a bad mom or a bad dad, and this and that. And I can promise you that even the most hardcore drug addict does not wake up in the morning and go, I can't wait to be a bad parent today. These are people who have problems, and our lack of having the same problem doesn't make any of us better than that person. So it's just the judgment that people as a whole put on that. I think that perception, if we could change the perception into seeing this person as another person who's living alongside us in our community that we could help, and then they could go forward and help somebody else, and so on and so forth, that would have a huge impact. Just seeing them as human beings.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. As an attorney, I often see families where intervention could mean terminating parental rights or moving a child to foster care. How do you weigh those tough calls, and what's your guiding principle when a child's safety is on the line?
Well, the guiding principle is the child's safety. I mean, I'm not going to ever put a child in a situation that I think could be threatening to them physically or emotionally, especially physically. So that's kind of always leads the way, and that's the basis of everything that we do in family law, right? Or at least in this area of the code, is what's in the children's best interest. So ultimately, though, look, I lose sleep over parental rights cases. They're really challenging because I believe that people have a right to be the parents to their children. It's a struggle because children also have a right to live free from abuse and neglect. So while we have a right to parent our children, we don't have a right to abuse and neglect our children, right? And I constantly am telling people we have to be very careful in this line of work that we are not becoming social engineers. And that is the tough call. That is a tough call to make sometimes, because in a lot of cases, you can see how you could lift a child up in theory. I think there's a lot of whole other host of abandonment issues and stuff that can come along with that. But in theory, how you can change a child's destiny by not sending them back to a family that lives at the poverty line, right? But that's not really our job. My job is not to make sure that every single child who comes through my court gets to go to the best school, ride around in the best car, and have a clear pathway to going to a great university. My job is to make sure that families are safe, families are stable, and if I can achieve that, I don't really care if they're living, I shouldn't say it like that. I care, but my standard is not 1-bedroom apartment versus 4-bedroom middle-class home. That's not my standard. It's just safe and appropriate and meets their emotional and physical needs. And if all of those boxes are checked, then a child should really go home every single time.
No, I agree. Okay, I'd love to hear a success story without naming names, of course. Can you share a time when early intervention in your court changed a child's trajectory for the better?
Well, generally speaking, early intervention doesn't come to the court. So Barbara probably
Good point.
better know any of those stories than us. I know of one dad who asked if he could come and speak to us at court about one of the programs that he went through with early intervention in Galveston. Which of course, yes, please come and be a marketing tool for us. But I'm going to defer to Barbara because I don't ever meet the families before they come to court. I mean, and hope so. In theory, hopefully, I never meet you, right?
Barbara?
Yeah. So there are many, many families that I meet that judge never sees because of this program. And I'll give you one story that I'm really, really proud of. We had a mom with two children, a victim of domestic violence, who had ended up unhoused due to the charges of her significant other. She wanted help in the worst way. Like she came to our family team meeting and was open to meeting with anyone who could help her. What she needed was someplace for her two children to go because she had made it into the training program for TDJC. But she had nowhere for her kids to go because she had become unhoused. She didn't have a way to get to the training. You get paid once you get there, but you have to get there. And CPS brought her in for early intervention. This was not a legal case. It was not in family-based services. It was before anything had happened. So we were able to call several providers, found a spot for the two children to go for the time during her training. I was able to access another provider to buy a Greyhound bus ticket, and she went to that training. She graduated. She came back, reclaimed her children, and she is now working in the jail system and has her own place. And if we hadn't been able to work with her and to provide those services, she would have been an unhoused mother with two children who CPS probably then would have gone forward to keep the children safe and off the street, which is understandable. But what she needed was just that step up, just that help to get her life together. And she's doing great, last I heard. So, and Judge has never met her.
I know,
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
I've never even heard that story until just now.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful success story.
We have, I can't remember what it's called, the wall where I do not discuss people that I meet or even people that do maybe end up in court that I have tried to help. Judge doesn't know.
That's wonderful news. Wonderful success story. Okay, well, for the parents or caregivers listening, what advice would you give them if they are worried a child in their life might need help or if they are involved in a CPS case themselves?
So the number one advice, suggestion, I'm not going to use the word advice, but take this away whenever you're in court is communicate. Please do not assume anything. Again, like if there's a concern that a child who is in your life, whether it's your child or a friend's child or a child that you interact with through, school or something like that, who needs additional assistance, well, you can start small, communicate with the school, communicate with the other people who are immediately surround that child and say, I think we need to lean into him or her. What are some things that we can do here that would assist without being overly intrusive? Then obviously, let me just give a caveat here. If there's a serious concern of abuse here, somebody's injured, please seek medical attention. Don't be like, let me discuss this with, his arm looks broken, but I'm going to discuss this just with the school nurse first or something like that. But all of that is to communicate with the people who are around you. So many times, people, it's kind of like the thing that there's a saying that's like, or part of your 911 emergency training, I guess, is if you need to tell somebody to call 911, it's like point to that person directly and say, you go call 911. Don't just shout out, call 911, because then everybody's going to think somebody else is doing it. Right. So it's kind of the same idea, is you be the person to talk to this person. Don't just assume other people in this children's life are paying attention. But if you are also involved in a CPS case, communicate. The more you communicate with your attorney, with the court, with the caseworker, don't not do something because you lack transportation or a phone or anything like that. If you tell the judge, I work with the judges across the state. I see them at conferences. I have not met a judge involved in child welfare yet who thinks that their job is just to show up and sit. Every judge that I've met that I know who works in child welfare is there because they genuinely want to help people create safe and stable families. So if you and they want to, and they will hold everybody accountable. So it's just tell everybody your barriers. This is not a place to try to look your best, like to try to say I don't need help. We're here. Clearly you do. So it's just to communicate without shame and embarrassment. And I know that that's really hard to do. But how many times do I hear in court them say that is either somebody say, I haven't been able to get a hold of the parent, or well, they've never told me that. I think so many times in court, after I listen to everything, it's very clear that all the parties are just not really communicating with each other. And if we could get more communication around the table, and I say around the table because we're all really here to help this family. And if we could approach it, at least at the beginning, as kind of a group project and less adversarial, I really think that people could start to make a lot of progress, because everybody really has the same goal, and that's to exit children out of the system safely back into the home of their parents.
No, I agree.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, there's also a lot of public misunderstanding about CPS and the courts. One myth that I would like to bust is that CPS wants to remove the children. As a court-appointed CPS attorney myself, I know firsthand from my experience that removal is not what CPS wants to do. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So what's one myth you would like to bust about how the child welfare system works based on what you see every day?
Well, I think that is a really important an important myth, is that we want more kids in care. We do. Nobody wants more kids in care.
No.
That is absolutely not true. Another myth about the child welfare system, I mean, along those lines, that CPS doesn't necessarily want to return children. Like I said, everybody has, at least initially, I believe, and that the goal is always to try to get children back home to their families. Statistically, we know that sets them up for the best outcome long term, is to be with families. So that should always be the goal. The other just myth, and I don't know that it's necessarily a myth, but again, it goes to sort of something that I mentioned earlier about perception, is I hate to use popular words today because I don't want to minimize the impact of this, but an implicit bias against children who are labeled as foster children. I think sometimes that label actually leads people to view their behaviors differently than they view a behavior from a child from a two-parent, what is considered to be a stable house. We don't know what's happening in that house. We don't necessarily know that it's stable or unstable just because there's two parents in there, right? But my experience has been that whether people realize it or not, these kids, when they are misbehaving or whatever, I don't know why it suddenly got darker in here. When they are misbehaving, that it's because they're a foster child, even if it's a normal age appropriate behavior. That's not necessarily really a myth, and that's not really what you asked me, but that is something that I
Yeah.
see at the board. So it's like, you know, if my child is sitting in class and talking a lot, they send me an email and say, Miss Rawlinson, so-and-so, like, please talk to him at home about controlling his voice, and there's appropriate times to talk and not talk in class. Thank you. But if it's my foster child, it's disrespect, unable to pay attention in class, harasses his peers, all of these things that get attached to him. And I sometimes think it's because they know he's a foster child. And he's almost, for whatever reason, held to a higher standard, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because he's already coming in with a lot of trauma and hurt and confusion. So that's not really a myth. That's not what you asked me, but that would be my thing.
Okay. No, I think it's a wonderful answer. I think maybe some confirmation bias about the child. No, I think that's a wonderful answer. Okay. Well, looking ahead, what is one change you'd love to see in how we approach childhood intervention, whether it's policy, funding, or just a shift in how society views these kids?
All of the above.
Yes. Well, like, as I just said, yes, please, let's start treating our foster children like normal children, and not expecting more or less of them because of their circumstance. And it would be the same thing that I mentioned earlier, and that's not just for the foster care system, it's just society as a whole. Let's treat each other with kindness. Let's treat each other with respect. But obviously, I'll always advocate for more funding. I would love to see more funding. I would love to see mental health and young adult substance abuse services and a better push towards that. I think that, again, the department will be the first person. They say it in all of, like, they're not trying to be anybody's parent, and I don't think even the state would argue that they make the best parent. I think they're doing the best they can with the resources that they have. So I'm not going to fault them for some of those things, but at the same time, kind of going back to something Barbara said earlier, a lot of our young adults who we have at residential treatment centers and things of this nature, from just the bench where I'm sitting, I'm not sure we're solving their core issues. The problems that really led to where they are. We're helping to make them functional, but it would be resources, mental health resources, and substance abuse resources that really go to the root of everything that's happened to them. And some of these children have been abused since they were in utero. So figuring out what that looks like and really setting up a system to help them solve that problem. And I think if we did that, we probably wouldn't need, we'd have less juveniles in detention. We'd have less adults in the prison system. We'd have fewer children in residential treatment centers, and then subsequently fewer children who later on become CPS parents.
No, I fully agree. We need more mental health and substance abuse resources. Well, thank you. Well, Judge Rawlinson, Ms. Bischoff, thank you so much for joining me today and shedding light on the vital role of childhood intervention. Your insights remind us that these are not just cases, they are kids' lives, not a stack of paper, and the work you do can set them on a path to healing and hope. For those listening, if this hits home, or if you want to learn more about family law and child welfare, head to my website, chrismeyerlawfirm.com, where I'll have resources and links tied to today's discussion. If you are moved by what you have heard, please subscribe to the podcast for more conversations on family, resilience, and making a difference. Until next time, keep advocating for what matters, especially the kids who need it most. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good afternoon.